the idea and the rows around the Ukrainians going to glamp in Stradbally. Jennifer.
Oh, I think they certainly won't be glamping, Pat. I think that we're at the point now where it is official government policy to be housing refugees in tents. Is just completely unacceptable. We're coming
Now,
into
other
winter.
countries do it, but they tend to be in military-style army tents, not in glamps.
Yeah, and I think even if other countries do it, I still don't think it's acceptable. We're coming into a winter. It's going to be cold. It's going to be wet. These are going to be primarily women and children. What schools are the children going to go to?
They're not.
They're not. So
they're going to be tutored on site.
Yes, look at that. I think it's as if the government has sort of thrown in the towel on providing any sort of medium term solution to this problem. We've had this for now 18 months. There are many solutions, and the government just has not progressed them. And I think now they're saying, well, look, we'll put them in tents and we'll try to forget about it. It's just not acceptable.
And by the way, this weekend it's air conditioning they need, not heaters, and they do have access to heaters, we are told. So, Paul, this is the lowest of the low at this point.
Well, to say the government is throwing in the towel when Ireland has accepted 90,000 people from Ukraine who are fleeing the war, I think is a bit glib. Ireland has taken a huge number of people. By and large, we have only required tented accommodation for short periods, but we have used it. And
we did in Grangegorman, or in where was it? In
Clare.
Clare, was it?
Yeah, there were incidents in Clare and elsewhere. Look, and as I say, it has only been for short periods in the past. Like,
in Gormanston is where I was thinking of.
There are refugee camps all over the world when in situations of war. So the use of tents is not unusual. I think the Taoiseach said yesterday that he hopes that it will be for short periods of time. And I think that by and large we have to acknowledge how well we have handled
past next August, because already Electric Picnic is sold out for next year in an hour. Yeah. So that is a deadline, but the government is saying it'll be for just a few weeks. Craig, what do you say?
Well, I was actually at a press conference with Minister Roderick O'Gorman yesterday, and what was clear from his comments were that tented accommodation is now part of the plan. He had said previously that he hoped never to have to be for tents not to be used going forward. We're back into the situation now where that is going to be the kind of fail-safe when they run out of housing. I think they're looking at around 700 tents is the figure that Minister O'Gorman said yesterday, and I think I have to say there is a bit of a failure in terms of bringing back housing that isn't there already. When you look at something like the rent of room scheme or trying to bring back more of the kind of vacant housing, they probably should have done more in that.
Yeah. The question of what to do with all the people coming in, because we had thought that the big influx, which it did happen in February of last year, but still 650 Ukrainians are coming here every single week. Now, if you take a typical hotel, might have 100 bedrooms and you might have two people in a bedroom, you're looking for 2 hotels a week becoming available. I mean, that simply is not possible. Jennifer.
Look, I think the thing is, Pat, this is an issue that's just not going to go away. I think the government had hoped that it would peak and then it would just, that they'd manage it.
We all hoped the war would end.
Would end, exactly. And it's not. And I think there has been a failure of the government to really look at this as a medium or long-term issue. It is challenging. I don't think anyone could ever dispute that this is challenging for the government. But there are solutions that are there. As Craig said, there is existing accommodation. I mean, if you just look even at the Baggot Street Hospital.
Now, everyone who talks to us about this, at Durras, for example, were on during the week, and they say, sure, look at Baggot Street Hospital. Now, the best will in the world, that might take a week's worth of Ukrainian, in a pinch. 650 people in that Baggot Street facility, I'm not even sure. But suppose it was. So that's Baggot Street taken care of this week. What do we do for next week?
But I suppose I'm just using that as an example of what could be done. The community around that area wanted use for Ukrainians. The developers actually offered money for it, and the government said it would take 9 months to do a feasibility study to see whether it was possible. So I think I'm just using that as an explanation, as that here's a solution and here's how the government is failing to actually use that solution.
The government's far too slow. 9 months for a feasibility study?
Yeah, but I come back to the point that 100,000 people have come to Ireland fleeing a war, and that is a huge achievement that we have been able to open our doors to people who are desperately in need. And by and large, the vast majority are not in tented accommodation. So we need to focus on the success of that story too, and how we provided shelter and refuge. There are locations where we could turn around. I know in my own constituency we have warehouses that are being used to accommodate refugees, and there's huge amounts of work needed to put in place, even for very basic accommodation in that. So I think the
The
department.
Germans have used warehouses where obviously they have indoor toilet facilities and all the rest of it. But basically, what they've done is they partition the big open space, so there's no ceiling on the rooms.
But Pat, that is happening in Dublin and other places in the country as well. So like we shouldn't underestimate the amount of work, and at a very senior level in the Department of Children, there are very senior people doing tasks that would otherwise have been done
Sure,
by much.
Craig?
But I think there's one area, for example, that there's clearly been a failure, and that's the rollout of modular homes. You know, we were promised them for a long time, and it just simply is nowhere where it needs to be. We saw in Jennifer's constituency of Wicklow last year as well, where local issues that I think, especially the government parties, need to come in on the councillors and get issues
One
like
of the
that
issues,
through.
Craig, is that modular homes are actually permanent homes. I mean, they're good for several decades if they're
Yeah.
built well. And we've seen some examples. I think on this program we talked about modular homes in Sligo, which look very, very nice, built by Sisk, I think, and they're fabulous. But there are other kinds of solutions that are more temporary in nature and clearly temporary. You could be talking about mobile homes. You could be talking about containers, which are, shipping containers, which are modified to become individual units with privacy and all the rest, with all mod cons that would suit maybe a family of 2 adults and 2 children. And they are by definition temporary, and therefore locals need not be fearful of those kind of solutions. Whereas when they see modular homes and they think they're going to be there forever, it may raise objection.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing that we have, which would be kind of a bit more quicker turnaround, is that the Department of Housing put out a call to every state organisation for properties that were already within their remit. That's been quite slow as well to turn around. And I guess you come into the realm of labour shortages when you talk about all the various different schemes. But I think on the modular, I mean, there was special planning exemptions put in there, and it just simply hasn't been delivered at the scale that we were expected or promised.
Paul, one of the issues that is a corollary of all of this, see, Ukrainians are allowed to work, and if they achieve a level of proficiency in language, or even in some places where a command of English might not be vital in some of the service industries that are crying out for help. But the problem is, for them to become independent, they've got to be able to source accommodation independently. And Irish people are finding it hard to source accommodation independently. And that's compounding the problem.
Yeah, and I suppose one of the biggest challenges we have in responding to the housing crisis, and there's a lot of areas where we've done work on that, is the skills shortage, and we're doing work in terms of apprenticeships and so on. But that chicken and egg scenario of housing and additional labour to produce additional housing is a
people
challenge.
in direct provision who have permission to stay in Ireland, and they're still living in direct provision.
And they shouldn't be in direct provision. And
they've nowhere to go.
in reality, in responding to direct, all of the parties in government came in to intend to abolish direct provision, and in fact we've actually produced a system now which is below the standard of direct provision, and nobody wanted that, but it's a direct response to a very different international environment that would have existed 2 or 3 years ago.
Now, a text from a listener, Jennifer, aimed at you. Will you please ask Jennifer where the government is going to put the Ukrainian refugees? They're using tents because there is nothing else. What is Jennifer's solution? Like the rest of the politicians, she is just talking.
Well, no, the first solution is look at the properties that we currently have in state control. And there are many, many empty properties across the state. And I gave an example of the back
You gave
street.
one,
I gave
which
one.
everyone gives.
There's, I think, currently in Wicklow, there are something like 10 HSC properties, buildings that the HSC have said are surplus to requirements. And I would imagine...
How big are they?
I'm not sure, but I would imagine that is replicated all across the country. So I think the first
But
place...
hang on, you're a politician in Wicklow and you're advocating accommodation in Wicklow. Surely you should inform yourself as to how many square metres of potential accommodation are available.
So when I put those questions to the HSC, they don't give me that information. I've just asked which premises are surplus to requirements, and they came back with that information. But I mean, this is something that the department has done. It has gone out and has asked all the other departments what premises they have available. And as Craig said, the other departments are very, very slow to get involved in that process. The first thing we need to do is look at the properties that we currently have. Then it is a matter of looking at, and I do think modular homes will have to be one of the solutions as well.
Craig, the war is a year and a half old. So looking at the list of potential properties, it is taking a long time. I mean, how do you crack the whip when you're dealing with, not with politicians who would certainly go out there and bang the drum, but with bureaucrats who are tasked with the job by government, the OPW, or within the HSE, or within any department, the Department of Justice, the Department of Education? What have you got spare?
Yeah, but you could also turn it a different way. Why not incentivize it a bit more for people? So when you look at the level of spare rooms that we saw from the census data, for example, quite significant in the urban areas of your Dublins, your Corks, Galways, Limericks. I mean, if you made that actually meaningful, where you really incentivize people. I mean, the data from that, there was some homes where there was 2 and 3 bedrooms spare. Now, some people might say, "Oh, I don't want to share my home with someone else." But if you make it worth their while, it's a bit of a carrot and stick
The
approach
government
there.
have responded in terms of the rental room scheme and extending that to people in local authority housing and people who are on social welfare payments. So there has been move.
But that's 14 grand a year. I mean, so could you go beyond that? I mean, if we're really at the point now where we have all this money floating around in the government coffers, here's one avenue that could be potentially easy win.
And I do think the government need to communicate that a lot better. I don't think the communication is there. And indeed, when the Ukrainian war started, a lot of people said that they had accommodation available. That process was a failure. I mean, I myself said I had a room available, but
Jennifer,
it took a year for
in
someone to
fairness,
contact me, and there
the
was
goodwill
tens of thousands
the
of
goodwill
people
that
who
emerged
were
at
in a
the beginning
similar
of
situation.
the war couldn't have been sustained, and many people withdrew from that process, not because it was complicated, but because they realised that they couldn't house somebody in their home.
They withdrew from the process because the process wasn't good. They were waiting
I
months and
don't agree
months.
with that.
Well, I was waiting a year for someone to come to me and ask
But you're
whether
a
my
politician.
accommodation
Surely
was.
you would have a more
I was,
direct
I
line
was,
to the
I
Red
was
Cross.
chasing. I was chasing it up. I actually had people come out and see it that weren't suitable, that needed a bigger room than what I could provide. So we did go through that process, but now that room's not available because
Someone telling me that Wicklow County Council has just refused permission for modular homes.
for 2 sites. Yeah, so there was 2
So
sites.
on the one hand, you're saying we'll do everything we can, but then on the other hand, the council is saying no.
Well, and I think this is an issue. I mean, something like 12 Fianna Gael and Fianna Fáil councillors voted against modular accommodation going on to 2 sites in Wicklow and West Wicklow. And I think, and I can understand it is challenging, and I know people are worried about resources and they're worried about services and things like that. But I think there is a responsibility on local councillors to really mirror what the national policy and government policy is on this as well. And I think that's really important. And I think that communication is required as well. And there
Of course,
wasn't.
we've also taken steps in that area too. So the requirement for local authorities to use vote of councillors for Part 8 is now is no longer required. There's no planning permission required for
This was for disposal of land.
for
That was only for 3
So we
years.
have taken very significant steps to try and speed up that process.
Yeah. Reading some of the texts, purpose-built student accommodation in Sligo will not be made available to students this year because it's been used to house refugees. Actually, that was reversed, as far as I remember. We were talking to Martin
There's
Sherry.
nearly 3,000 units in total that are coming back on stream.
So Ukrainians that find work still don't pay rent. Well, if they're in state-provided accommodation, they don't, although there was some talk about them paying for food if they are in employment or even enjoying welfare payments. Sick to the teeth of listening every day about housing refugees and fake refugees. Families are back home with their parents again because they can't find homes. This election will show the result of people's anger. Another one, what about closed nursing homes that are vacant? Well, a lot of people were maybe opting out of the nursing home sector because people are sick, they need medical care, whereas young refugee families are generally healthy, they don't need the level of care. But the government has said, am I right, Paul, that you can't convert a nursing home into refugee accommodation for 2 years?
Yeah, Minister Barry Butler has been very strong to try and retain the
because
capacity
we're
of that
losing nursing
sector.
home
Absolutely,
capacity.
yeah.
There are 5 small schools in North Sligo that would gladly take Ukrainian children in. Why can't we open up community centres and all the closed houses in these areas and provide rural link? There are holiday mobile homes all over the country that could be incentivised. Many permanent campsites closed for the winter season. That's from Barry in Kilkenny. Again, you do that, and then come the tourist season, you've got to find accommodation for people that you're displacing out of that accommodation. So anyway, intractable problems.